The courtroom was draped in a silence so profound it felt heavy, a tangible weight pressing down on everyone present. Ben Shapiro, a figure known for his incisive intellect and sharp suits, stood before Judge Frank Caprio. Caprio, whose reputation for compassionate rulings preceded him, met Shapiro's gaze directly, his expression unreadable, yet undeniably firm. "Mr. Shapiro," Caprio began, his voice cutting through the stillness with an unexpected gravitas. "Your arguments, while intellectually rigorous, lack a fundamental understanding of human suffering. You claim the law is absolute, an unyielding framework of logic and precedent. But today, here in my courtroom, you will learn that the law also has a heart." The judge's hand rose, and with a swift, decisive motion, his gavel slammed down. It wasn't a dismissal. It was an announcement, a final declaration of a ruling that completely contradicted the outcome Shapiro had meticulously argued for, the one he had confidently expected. The case was a high-profile one, concerning a low-income family on the brink of eviction, caught in a legal quagmire due to a technicality Shapiro had vehemently exploited in his presentation. The air crackled with the finality of Caprio's decision. Shapiro visibly stiffened. A barely perceptible tremor ran through his posture, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Yet he did not explode. There was no outward display of anger or frustration. Instead, he took a slow, deep breath, the kind of breath one takes to regain composure under immense pressure. A flicker of something unreadable, a complex mix of surprise and perhaps a nascent understanding, passed through his eyes. He nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle it could have been missed, acknowledging the unexpected, monumental turn of events. The camera, almost instinctively, panned away from Shapiro, drifting towards the gallery. There, a family sat huddled together, a mother, a father, and their 2 young children. Their faces, moments before, etched with despair and the grim expectation of homelessness, now morphed. First, there was a stunned relief, a slow dawning of comprehension that their world had not, in fact, been shattered. Then, tears began to flow freely, tears of overwhelming gratitude, directed not at the sharp legal mind who had just argued against their very survival, but at the judge who had offered them a reprieve. Shapiro watched them, their palpable relief a stark, undeniable contrast to his own professional position, to the intellectual victory he had been so certain was his. It was a moment of profound, unsettling imbalance. Sometimes, even the sharpest mind needs to feel the weight of a different kind of truth. Without another word, Shapiro turned to leave the courtroom. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, echoing softly in the now murmuring chamber. But before he reached the heavy oak doors, he paused. He turned his head, looking back across the room, his gaze locking with Judge Caprio's for a long, silent moment. It wasn't the look of anger or defeat, but a challenging stare. It was a look that promised something more, something yet to unfold, a silent vow that this was far from over. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Ben Shapiro inhabited a world defined by intellectual combat and rapid-fire discourse, a universe meticulously constructed from facts, logic, and an unyielding commitment to principles. His daily life in Los Angeles, California, was a testament to this ethos. He moved with the precision of a debater preparing for a critical argument. His schedule, a tightly woven tapestry of research, writing, and broadcasting. His home, a comfortable and well-appointed space, served as both sanctuary and a command center for his media empire. The car he drove was reliable, efficient, a tool for navigation rather than a statement. His days were a blur of podcast recordings, editorial meetings, and appearances on various media platforms, where his sharp wit and encyclopedic knowledge were always on full display. He thrived on the intellectual sparring, the cut and thrust of debate, where clarity of thought and consistency of argument were the ultimate weapons. In his circles, intellectual prowess was the highest currency, and directness, even bluntness, was valued as a sign of integrity. His family life, though fiercely private, was structured, providing a stable foundation from which he launched his public intellectual crusades. For Shapiro, the law was a series of clear-cut rules, a system designed for logical consistency, where the winning argument was simply the one that adhered most closely to established legal and philosophical principles. He navigated this world with an almost surgical precision, confident in the power of his convictions. Across the country, in the bustling yet intimately connected city of Providence, Rhode Island, Judge Frank Caprio occupied an entirely different sphere. His world was grounded in the tangible realities of a working-class community, steeped in strong family ties and an unwavering focus on local concerns. Caprio's court was a municipal one, a place where everyday people confronted the mundane but often impactful consequences of traffic violations, parking tickets, and minor offenses. His routine involved a constant ebb and flow of human stories, each unique, each carrying its own weight of circumstance and struggle. He listened, he empathized, and he sought solutions that, while respecting the boundaries of the law, often leaned towards the humane. People in Providence didn't just know Judge Caprio, they revered him. He was a familiar face, a comforting presence, often seen as a father figure dispensing wisdom from the bench. His Italian-American heritage was not just a biographical detail, but a living, breathing part of his identity, subtly influencing his emphasis on family, community, and the inherent dignity of every individual who appeared before him. In Caprio's courtroom, the law was not merely an abstract set of rules, but a tool to be wielded with compassion, a means to understand and alleviate, where possible, the burdens of his fellow citizens. He was a man perfectly attuned to the rhythms and needs of his environment, a beloved figure deeply embedded in the fabric of his city. In contrast, Shapiro, despite his considerable intellect and national renown, was often perceived as an outsider to Caprio's world. He was an intellectual warrior, a formidable debater, but one who, some argued, might not fully grasp the profound nuances of everyday struggles, the subtle complexities that shape the lives of people in Providence. Subtle tensions had begun to emerge, underscoring the growing philosophical chasm between these two worlds. Shapiro's increasingly prominent profile, coupled with his often uncompromising stance on legal and ethical matters, inadvertently positioned him in opposition to the brand of compassionate justice that Caprio embodied. Whispers and murmurs had started to circulate in various media circles. Commentators would often muse, "Shapiro would never understand that kind of situation," or "Caprio is perhaps too soft, too lenient." These were not direct confrontations, but rather understated, yet persistent, signs that their paths were on an inevitable collision course, a clash of ideologies waiting to happen. The stage was being set for a profound encounter, not just between two men, but between two distinct philosophies of justice. The philosophical chasm between Shapiro's and Caprio's approaches to justice wasn't a sudden development. It had been widening for years, a slow, inexorable divergence of legal thought, even before their paths directly intersected. Their eventual courtroom showdown was merely the culmination of deeply entrenched, fundamentally opposing worldviews. Shapiro's early career provided numerous illustrations of his unwavering commitment to the strict letter of the law, a commitment that often led to outcomes perceived as harsh by those outside his intellectual sphere. There was, for instance, a particularly memorable debate during his formative years, where he argued vehemently against a seemingly lenient plea deal for a minor offender. His argument, delivered with characteristic analytical precision, dissected the legal precedents and statutory requirements, concluding that any deviation, no matter how sympathetic the circumstances, would set a dangerous precedent and undermine the integrity of the justice system. Mitigating factors, in his view, were extraneous to the legal question at hand. He viewed judicial discretion, in many instances, not as an act of compassion, but as a form of judicial activism, a dangerous overreach that threatened the very foundations of objective law. His writings from that period consistently championed a legal framework built on clear, unyielding rules, where emotional appeals held no sway against the cold, hard logic of the statutes. These were not moments of personal humiliation for Shapiro, but rather public demonstrations of his consistent, unyielding intellectual framework, solidifying his reputation as a formidable proponent of strict legalism. He was building his career, brick by logical brick, on the principle that the law, correctly applied, was its own justice. Conversely, Caprio's early days on the bench were characterized by a relentless search for the human element within the confines of the law. He made tough decisions, certainly, but always with an eye towards understanding the full context of each case. One anecdote, often recounted in Providence, spoke of a young man facing a hefty fine for a minor infraction, a sum that would have crippled his already struggling family. Instead of simply imposing the fine, Caprio delved into the man's circumstances, learning of his dedication to his community. Caprio, within the bounds of his authority, found an alternative, a structured community service program that not only satisfied the legal requirement, but also allowed the young man to contribute positively to his neighborhood. This approach earned him immense respect from the public, who saw him as a judge who truly cared. However, it also drew criticism from quarters that advocated for stricter, more uniform enforcement, viewing such leniency as an erosion of legal authority. For Caprio, the law was a tool, yes, but one that needed to be wielded with an understanding of its impact on individual lives and the broader community. He saw his role as not just applying the law, but also ensuring that justice in its fullest sense was served. As their respective careers progressed, these differing philosophies began to gain significant traction in public discourse. Shapiro emerged as the articulate, uncompromising voice for strict legalism, a champion of objective truth and unyielding principles. Caprio, meanwhile, became the widely beloved face of compassionate justice, a judge who consistently sought to temper the cold letter of the law with the warmth of human understanding. They became, in essence, indirect rivals in a burgeoning cultural debate about the very nature of justice itself. Their names, though rarely linked directly in the early years, represented two distinct poles of thought, two competing visions for how the legal system should operate. The specific eviction case that ultimately brought them together in Caprio's courtroom was far from a random occurrence. It was, rather, a perfect storm, an almost inevitable collision point that encapsulated the very essence of their core beliefs. For Shapiro, the case presented a clear-cut legal victory based on a precise technicality, an ideal opportunity to publicly demonstrate the unassailable power of his legal framework. It was a chance to prove his point, to show that the law, when applied without sentiment, was supreme. For Caprio, being assigned the case meant confronting a profound human struggle, a situation that, to him, embodied the very reason the law existed: to serve, to protect, and to ensure fairness, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable legal technicalities. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the inevitable showdown, the culminating moment after years of ideological divergence, where two titans of legal thought would finally meet, not just as adversaries in a courtroom, but as representatives of two profoundly different approaches to justice. After the courtroom ruling, a profound realization dawned on Shapiro. The familiar sting of defeat was absent, replaced instead by a gnawing sense of inadequacy, a quiet acknowledgement that his usual arsenal of sharp legal arguments had been insufficient. He understood then that confronting Caprio's brand of justice demanded a different approach, a challenge not rooted in legal precedent alone, but in something far more nuanced. He decided he needed to respond, not with anger or a public rebuttal, but with a deeper, more methodical form of engagement. His goal was no longer merely to win a legal argument, but to truly understand the very fabric of Caprio's world. Shapiro didn't issue a press release or schedule a retaliatory media appearance. Instead, he retreated into a period of silent, methodical planning. His initial step was exhaustive research. He began to meticulously study Caprio's court, delving into every available public record of his rulings, examining the nuances of his decisions, and seeking to comprehend the underlying philosophy that guided the judge's actions. He immersed himself in hours upon hours of Caprio's widely circulated court videos, not with the intention of dissecting legal flaws or identifying procedural missteps, but to grasp the why behind each verdict, the human considerations that so often seem to outweigh strict legal interpretations. He wanted to understand the context, the community, and the inherent values that shaped Caprio's judicial temperament. During this period, Shapiro maintained his outwardly unruffled demeanor, continuing his usual rigorous schedule of podcasts, television appearances, and debates. On air, he remained the same sharp, unyielding intellectual, dissecting hot-button topics with his characteristic analytical precision. His public persona showed no cracks, no hint of the profound internal shift taking place. Yet, behind the scenes, his nights were consumed by an entirely different pursuit. He devoured local Providence newspapers, poring over articles that detailed Caprio's community involvement, and more importantly, the stories of the individuals and families whose lives had been tangibly impacted by the judge's compassionate rulings. He wasn't just reading about legal cases. He was absorbing the narratives of a community, understanding its pulse, its struggles, and its triumphs. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift began to occur in his own internal arguments, a nascent consideration of the human element that he would have once dismissed as irrelevant sentimentality. He wouldn't have admitted it publicly, not yet, but the seeds of a new understanding were being sown. As his understanding of Caprio's world deepened, Shapiro began actively seeking a specific case, a precise opportunity that would allow him to engage the judge, not in a traditional legal battle, but in a challenge designed to operate on Caprio's own terms. He wanted a scenario that would force Caprio to confront his own principles in a novel way, while simultaneously allowing Shapiro to demonstrate his newly acquired, deeper understanding of compassionate justice. It was an intricate strategy, one that required patience and a keen eye for the right moment. He eventually found it. A small, seemingly insignificant case involving a local community center in Providence. The center was facing a complex zoning dispute, riddled with obscure legal technicalities that, if strictly applied, would undoubtedly lead to its closure. However, the potential impact on the community, particularly on low-income families and at-risk youth who relied on its services, was immense. This was not the kind of high-profile, ideologically charged case Shapiro typically gravitated towards. Yet, for his new goal, it was perfect. It presented a legal challenge where strict adherence to the letter of the law would lead to a harsh outcome, but where a nuanced, empathetic approach could preserve a vital community resource. It was the ideal battleground to test his evolving understanding and to challenge Caprio on his own philosophical turf. Weeks later, the familiar, imposing courtroom in Providence once again bore witness to Ben Shapiro. Yet, the atmosphere was subtly, profoundly different. No longer was he the sharp-edged advocate for a landlord in an eviction case, nor was he the bewildered intellectual reeling from an unexpected setback. This time, he stood before Judge Caprio, representing the very heart of the community, the local community center embroiled in the contentious zoning dispute. His posture was still precise, his suit still impeccably tailored, but his demeanor carried an uncharacteristic gravitas, a measured patience that had been absent before. This was not the Ben Shapiro of the past. This was a man who had meticulously studied his adversary's world and was now prepared to engage on entirely new terms. He began not with a flurry of legal citations or a rapid-fire dismantling of the opposing counsel's arguments. Instead, his opening statement was a quiet acknowledgement of the human element at the core of the case. He spoke deliberately, his voice resonating with a newfound empathy, explaining how the dry, technical language of zoning ordinances, while important, often obscured the vibrant, living impact they had on real people. He presented the legal arguments for keeping the center open, weaving them into a tapestry that highlighted the center's indispensable role in the community. But crucially, he didn't stop there. He called forward a series of witnesses, not just expert legal consultants or urban planners, but the very people whose lives were intertwined with the community center. First, a mother, her voice trembling slightly, spoke of the after-school programs that kept her children safe and engaged while she worked 2 jobs. Then, a teenager, once directionless, shared how the center's mentorship program had steered him away from trouble and towards college. An elderly man, his eyes shining with gratitude, described the weekly meal service and companionship that combated his profound loneliness. Shapiro listened intently to each testimony, his gaze often shifting to Caprio, ensuring the judge absorbed every word, every raw emotion. He presented compelling data on the positive social impact of the center, framing its existence not merely as a legal issue of land use, but as a crucial pillar of community well-being, a preventive measure against social decay, and a beacon of hope for hundreds. He argued that the legal precedent, while seemingly leaning towards closure, failed to account for the profound, quantifiable benefits the center provided, benefits that aligned with the very spirit of justice Caprio championed. Judge Caprio, known for his ability to see through pretense, was visibly surprised. His initial expression had been one of cautious anticipation, perhaps expecting a more refined, yet still purely legalistic assault. But as Shapiro unfolded his case, the judge's customary sternness gradually softened. He leaned forward, his chin resting on his hand, his gaze fixed on the parade of community members, his empathy palpable. He had undoubtedly heard similar stories before, but never presented with such a meticulously crafted legal framework by a figure like Ben Shapiro. It was a nuanced, compassionate appeal that utilized rigorous legal principles to support community welfare, rather than to override it. Then Shapiro turned directly to Caprio, his voice lowering slightly, but gaining an undeniable power. "Your Honor," he began, his eyes meeting Caprio's, "in our previous encounter, you taught me a valuable lesson about the heart of the law. You showed me that even the most intellectually rigorous arguments can fall short if they fail to acknowledge the human cost. Today, I have tried to apply that lesson, using the law's framework not to dismantle, but to protect a vital part of this community. The strict legal precedent might, on paper, lean one way towards closure, but the human impact, the tangible benefit to hundreds of lives, and indeed, the very spirit of justice, Your Honor, leans undeniably another." A heavy silence descended upon the courtroom, pregnant with anticipation. Caprio remained motionless for a long moment, his gaze unwavering as he stared at Shapiro, then slowly swept across the faces of the community members in the gallery. He took a deep breath, adjusted his glasses, and then began to speak. His voice, usually firm, carried a note of profound reflection. He delivered a ruling that not only unequivocally saved the community center from closure, but also, in an unexpected turn, publicly commended Shapiro for his unforeseen and commendable shift in perspective. Caprio didn't just rule in favor. He meticulously explained his reasoning, skillfully blending legal precedent with the overwhelming evidence of human need and community benefit, demonstrating how the law, when properly interpreted and applied, could indeed have a heart. As his gavel struck the bench, a wave of relief and joyous applause erupted through the courtroom, not just for the outcome, but for the extraordinary, unexpected display of common ground found between two seemingly opposing figures. The reverberations of that ruling echoed far beyond the walls of the Providence courthouse. For Judge Caprio, his reputation as a compassionate arbiter of justice was not merely reaffirmed, it was significantly enhanced, gaining a new, unexpected dimension. He had always been beloved by his community, but now he commanded respect from corners that once viewed his empathy as a weakness or an aberration. Legal scholars and pundits who had previously critiqued his approach as overly sentimental were forced to reevaluate, witnessing firsthand how his philosophy could influence even the most staunchly logical and principled minds. His ability to evoke a profound shift in someone like Ben Shapiro solidified his standing, proving that his brand of justice was not just effective, but transformative. He became an even more iconic figure, a testament to the power of human connection within the often impersonal machinery of the law. For Ben Shapiro, the outcome of the community center case marked a pivotal, though subtle, turning point. He did not, overnight, abandon the core principles that had defined his career. His commitment to legal text, logical consistency, and rigorous debate remained unshakable. However, his public discourse began to integrate a more nuanced, more empathetic understanding of the human element. His arguments, while still sharp and incisive, occasionally demonstrated a deeper appreciation for the real-world consequences of policy and law, a recognition that abstract principles, however sound, operate within a complex tapestry of human lives. He continued to be a formidable debater, but his rhetoric gained an unexpected depth, a dimension of compassion that resonated with a broader audience. He might not have publicly admitted a change of heart, but the shift was undeniable. Indeed, the occasional co-hosting of a charity event with Caprio, perhaps a joint op-ed in a national publication discussing the intersection of legal principles and community welfare, or even a nuanced piece acknowledging the value of different judicial philosophies, became possibilities. His career trajectory didn't undergo a radical overhaul, but his public persona acquired an unexpected richness, an added layer of humanity that broadened his appeal and challenged preconceived notions about his intellectual rigidity. He was still Ben Shapiro, the intellectual giant, but now he was also Ben Shapiro, the intellectual giant who had learned to look beyond the letter of the law to its spirit. The narrator concludes by reflecting on how the seemingly opposing forces of strict legalism and compassionate justice, often depicted as irreconcilable adversaries, could indeed find common ground. This unexpected alliance, forged in the crucible of a Providence courtroom, became a powerful testament to the enduring human capacity for growth and understanding. It underscored the profound importance of respecting different perspectives, even when those perspectives appeared diametrically opposed. True justice, the story revealed, often requires more than just a strict adherence to the letter of the law. It demands an engagement with its spirit, a recognition of its human impact, and a willingness to learn from those who approach it differently. The tale of Ben Shapiro and Judge Caprio became a compelling narrative of growth, of learning, and of the unexpected ways individuals can influence each other for the better. It wasn't a story of one person converting the other, but rather of a mutual, albeit initially reluctant, expansion of understanding. It showcased how even the most staunchly held beliefs can evolve when confronted with genuine human experience and compelling, empathetic argumentation. And so, Ben Shapiro, the intellectual giant renowned for his rapid-fire logic and uncompromising legal principles, learned a profound lesson: that sometimes the most powerful and ultimately effective arguments are those delivered not just from the intellect, but also, surprisingly, from the heart. This unlikely encounter proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that even in the toughest debates and the most entrenched ideological divides, there is always room for growth, for a deeper understanding, and for a little bit of unexpected humanity to triumph. It was a satisfying closure, a testament to the enduring power of empathy to bridge divides and foster a more complete, more just world.